The sky above the jungle moon was heavy with smoke and drifting ash, the air hot and tasting of metal as broken pieces of a human freighter lay scattered across the ground, each fragment twisted and blackened by fire, each corner hiding shadows that moved when the light flickered from the burning wreckage, the air thick with the scent of burnt wiring and crushed plants, the silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant call of unseen creatures. Through the haze came soft footsteps, slow and careful, belonging to scavengers with thin limbs and eyes that gleamed like glass, their voices low and sharp as they spoke in a language filled with clicks and hisses, their hands reaching for scraps of metal and glowing fragments of the ship's core, their movements quick and practiced as they picked over the ruin. Then came a sound that made them all freeze, a sound so small yet so sharp that it cut through the smoke and heat like a blade. It was the cry of something alive, weak and high-pitched, trembling in the dark between two slabs of twisted hull, a cry that did not belong to any jungle creature they knew, a cry that carried fear and pain in every note. One scavenger hissed to the others, his voice tight with warning, for they all knew the rules of this moon, and one rule was never to touch what still breathed after a crash. Yet hunger for valuables was stronger than fear, so they moved closer, their thin fingers pushing aside scorched metal, the heat stinging their skin, their eyes narrowing as they searched for the source of the sound. A small shape crawled out from the shadow, its face streaked with soot, its clothes torn and clinging to its small frame, its eyes wide with confusion and fear. It was a human child, barely more than 5 cycles old, its tiny hands shaking as it tried to stand, its lips trembling as it looked at the strangers before it. The scavengers whispered to each other, debating whether to take the child for ransom or leave it to the jungle. But before they could decide, the ground beneath them seemed to grow darker, as if something vast and heavy had stepped into the light, and a shadow rose behind the child, tall and broad, and breathing in deep, slow rumbles that made the air vibrate in their lungs. It was not a human soldier, nor any machine. It was a beast, its body covered in dark fur marked with scars that spoke of many battles, its head crowned with ridges of bone, its mouth lined with teeth that could tear metal, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light like twin embers, its claws sinking into the ground as it moved between the child and the scavengers. The scavengers froze, their skin turning pale, for they knew this predator. All sentient worlds knew it. A hunter feared in every system, a killer of men and destroyer of colonies, the kind that left nothing alive when it chose to strike. Yet here it stood, not lunging for the child, not attacking the scavengers, but placing itself as a wall between prey and danger. A low growl rolled from its chest, deep and endless, a sound that carried promise of death if they dared step forward. The scavengers glanced at each other, their fear outweighing greed, their feet moving back into the smoke, their hands dropping the scraps they had taken, their voices tight as they muttered old words of warning before vanishing into the misty trees. The beast stood still, the jungle's strange light painting its fur in streaks of gold and black, its head turning slowly until its eyes locked on the child's breath caught, its small fingers curling into its chest, unsure if this was the end or a strange mercy. The beast lowered itself, just slightly, tilting its head as if studying something rare and fragile. Somewhere above, the distant whine of engines began to grow louder, the kind of sound that belonged to machines hunting for survivors. The beast's ears twitched, its nostrils flaring as it scented the air. It looked once more at the child, then shifted its massive form, stepping closer so that its shadow fell fully over the small figure, a shield of muscle and claw. The child did not move, only watching as the beast's great arm bent and one clawed hand rested on the ground beside it. The beast's breathing slow and even, like the steady beat of some ancient drum, the wreckage around them hissing and groaning as metal cooled, the flames dying into embers, the jungle pressing closer with each passing second. Then came another cry, not of fear but of warning, from deep within the jungle's edge, a sound that made the beast's head lift sharply, its body tense as it shifted its weight, its gaze sweeping the shadows where glowing eyes now stared back at them, many eyes, low to the ground, their owners hidden but moving closer in silence. The child's voice was small, almost lost in the heavy air, calling out without words of understanding, just sound, just need. And in answer the beast stepped forward, placing itself fully between the approaching eyes and the tiny human, its claws curling into the soil, its teeth flashing in the gloom, the rumble in its chest growing deeper, carrying a promise that no one would touch what it now claimed to guard. The creatures in the dark hesitated, their advance faltering, their eyes blinking out one by one as they turned away, unwilling to challenge the thing that stood before them. The jungle fell quiet again, leaving only the soft sound of the child's breathing and the beast's low growl fading into stillness. And in that stillness, for the first time, the beast looked down at the child with something in its eyes that was not hunger and not rage, but something older, something the stars themselves had not seen in many ages. And though no word was spoken, something began in that moment that would reach far beyond this burning wreck and this lonely moon. The jungle air was heavy with damp heat and the sharp scent of smoke drifting down from the wreck above. The beast stood with its shoulders hunched and its great head low, eyes scanning the tangle of roots and shadows around them. The child still crouched at its side, with trembling hands clutching at a scrap of cloth, the sound of the engines overhead rising and falling as the searchers drew closer, their thin blue lights cutting through the canopy in sharp moving lines like the sweep of cold knives through leaves. The beast turned its head slowly, its gaze meeting the child's for the briefest moment, and in that moment there was no fear in those ember-colored eyes, only a deep and steady awareness, as if it had chosen something and would not turn from it. Then it gave a soft sound from deep in its chest, not the growl of warning it had given the scavengers, not the roar of challenge it had offered the jungle predators, but a sound almost like a word in a language too old for humans to know, a sound that seemed to say, "You are mine now, and I will keep you." The engines above gave a rising wail as a dark shape dropped from the mist, a machine shaped like an insect with long pointed legs and a glass head glowing pale, its body humming with a low dangerous rhythm. The beast's ears flattened against its skull, and its claws dug deeper into the soil. The child's eyes widened as the insect machine's head tilted, a thin red beam scanning across the broken trees until it found them, the beam settling first on the child's face, then sliding up to the beast's eyes. The machine did not hesitate, its front limbs unfolding to reveal twin barrels glowing with cold blue fire, the air humming as the weapons charged. The beast did not flinch, its massive body shifting just enough to block the child completely from the machine's sight. The hum rose into a sharp whine as the weapons prepared to fire. Then the beast moved, faster than sight, a blur of muscle and shadow and claw, a rush of air and a crack of metal as the machine was slammed to the ground. The jungle shook with the impact, the machine's limbs flailing before the beast's claws tore them away one by one, sparks showering the ground like angry stars, the red beam flickering wildly before it cut out, leaving only the sound of the beast's breathing and the hiss of cooling circuits. The child peered around the beast's side, their small mouth open in shock, but the beast did not look at the wrecked machine. It turned its gaze upward, scenting the air as if it knew more were coming. It reached down with one massive hand and scooped the child into the crook of its arm, the other hand pulling aside a curtain of thick vines to reveal a hollow between roots that twisted like the bones of the earth. Without a sound it slid inside, the darkness wrapping around them, the ground cool and damp beneath their feet, the air filled with the faint hum of hidden insects and the slow drip of water from the roots above. The beast moved without hesitation, following some unseen path through the underground hollows, its steps silent despite its size, the child clinging to its fur for balance as they moved deeper, each step taking them farther from the light above. Yet the sound of the engines did not fade. Instead it grew sharper, more focused, as if the hunters in the sky could still sense the life that hid beneath the soil. At last the beast stopped, lowering the child onto a bed of soft moss beside an underground stream. The water glowed faintly with pale blue light from tiny living things that drifted in its flow. The beast crouched low, dipping its head to drink before turning to the child, its eyes catching the strange glow and seeming to burn brighter. It made another sound, soft but firm, and though the child could not understand the meaning, something in the tone eased the tightness in their small chest. Above them the sound of the hunter's engine shifted, now joined by a colder voice that rolled through the air like distant thunder, a voice speaking in the trade tongue of the council, ordering that all survivors be collected, that the beast be destroyed on sight, that nothing from the wreck be allowed to escape. The child's hands clenched tighter in the moss, their eyes darting to the beast in silent question. The beast's ears twitched at the voice, and a memory flickered through its mind, a memory of a battlefield under a different sky, of human soldiers bleeding and broken, of a promise made long ago to a voice it could not forget, a promise it had thought buried beneath years of war and the endless kill orders of the council. Yet here in this dark hollow, with the child's eyes fixed on it, the promise rose again like fire in its chest. It would not give the child to them, not while breath still moved in its lungs. It stood again, the movement silent and sure, one claw tracing a line in the dirt as if marking a boundary only it could see. A silent vow that nothing would cross that line without meeting its teeth and claws. Then it lifted the child once more and turned toward a narrow tunnel at the far end of the hollow, the air from it cold and smelling faintly of stone and age, the kind of place that led deeper than even the hunters dared to follow. As they moved, shadows stirred in the edges of the tunnel, faint glimmers of eyes reflecting the stream's pale glow. The beast gave a low rumble, and the eyes blinked out. Whatever lived there melting away into the stone, the tunnel walls pressed close, the ceiling low enough that the beast had to bend, the child's head resting against its shoulder as the air grew colder and the sound of the engines above turned into a distant throb. When they emerged again into the night, it was far from the wreck, the jungle here older and thicker, the air heavy with the smell of rain and the calls of creatures that moved like ghosts between the leaves. The beast paused, scanning the canopy, its ears catching something beyond the constant song of the jungle, a thin, sharp whine that did not belong to any living thing. It came from the east, from where the moon's twin rivers met under the cliff of bones, a place even the fiercest hunters avoided. The beast's claws flexed at the sound. It knew the council would send their best there. It knew the child would never survive if they were caught in the open. And yet there was something else in the sound, a challenge, a call that stirred the old fire in its blood. It adjusted its grip on the child and began moving toward it, each step a choice, each breath another beat in the silent oath that now bound them together. And far above, unseen in the drifting clouds, the council ships shifted their paths, their lights sweeping the jungle like cold, searching eyes. The hunt was far from over, and the moon itself seemed to hold its breath. The night fell fast over the jungle moon, shadows spilling like dark water across the tangled roots and high branches, the air thick with the cries of unseen things and the smell of wet leaves and old stone. The beast moved through it without sound, its great frame bending and weaving between trunks as if it had always been part of this place. The child held close against its chest, with eyes wide and head turning at every strange light and flicker in the gloom. Above the trees faint shapes glided, their wings stretched wide and catching the last flicker of a storm-lit sky, their cries sharp and cold like broken metal scraping together. The beast's ears turned toward them, but its steps never slowed. It knew these creatures hunted in pairs, one driving prey into the path of the other, yet its path wound in ways that made no sense to a pursuer, always shifting, always finding cover before the hunters could close their circle. The ground beneath them changed from thick roots to wet earth that sucked at the beast's claws, every step leaving deep marks that filled with water almost at once. The air here was warmer, heavier, and laced with a faint blue mist that glowed faintly between the trees. The child reached out a hand toward the mist, but the beast shifted them away, its head turning sharply toward the left, where the sound of something moving came through the undergrowth, slow and deliberate like the drag of a heavy chain. From the shadows a shape emerged, long and scaled with eyes like molten gold and a mouth full of hooked teeth, its body sliding silently through the leaves, each coil as thick as the beast's leg. The child gasped and clung tighter, but the beast did not step back. It set the child down gently behind a curtain of hanging roots and stepped forward, claws flexing, shoulders rolling like a storm gathering in silence. The serpent's head swayed, tasting the air, its tongue flicking in and out as it caught the scent of prey and predator alike, its muscles tensing in waves that rolled down its long body. And then it struck, faster than most eyes could follow. But the beast was already moving, one arm sweeping up to catch the strike, claws biting into the thick scales. the other arm driving forward with the force of a falling tree. The serpent twisted, its coils lashing out, wrapping around the beast's chest and legs, the air humming with the strain as muscle met muscle. The child watched through the roots, eyes wide and breath quick, the fight twisting across the ground as leaves and soil flew up around them, the serpent's hiss cutting through the night until the beast's jaws closed over its neck, the sound sharp and final, the coils loosening and falling away, the great body slumping into the wet earth with a heavy thud. The beast stood over it for a moment, chest heaving, steam rising from its fur in the cool mist. Then it turned back toward the child and reached out a hand. They moved on, the jungle pressing in thicker than before, the sounds of the night shifting into lower tones, the hum of insects growing louder until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trees here grew so close their trunks touched, their roots rising high enough to form walls, narrow paths winding between them like veins, the air heavy with the smell of sap and something older, something that carried the scent of bones. In the distance faint lights began to appear, not from the sky and not from fire, but from the ground itself, where patches of pale green fungus glowed in strange shapes, some forming lines that almost looked like writing, others curling into spirals that led deeper into the narrow paths. The beast slowed here, its head turning often, its ears twitching at sounds the child could not hear. The lights seemed to draw them forward, but at the same time the darkness beyond them pressed harder, thick, and watchful. They came at last to a clearing where the trees bent inward, their roots curling above the ground like the ribs of a great creature long dead. In the center lay a shallow pool, the water dark and still, yet when the beast stepped close it rippled faintly though no wind touched it. The child leaned forward over the beast's arm, their reflection staring back at them from the water surface. But behind that reflection shapes began to move, faint and shifting, their outlines too blurred to see clearly, yet their eyes glimmering faintly with something like hunger. The beast stepped back, the ripples fading, and without a sound it turned away from the pool, its pace quickening as if it knew the water would not let them go without cost if they lingered. The child clung tighter, sensing the change in its stride, the glow of the fungus fading behind them as they entered a stretch of jungle where even the mist seemed afraid to drift. The air here was cold, sharp enough to make the child's teeth chatter, and each breath came out in pale clouds that hung for a moment before vanishing. Then the ground ahead began to tremble, faint at first, then stronger, until even the hanging vines shook and the leaves above quivered like frightened things. The beast stopped, lowering the child to the ground and standing still with head raised. The sound came from ahead, heavy and rhythmic, the kind of sound that could only be made by something vast, each step followed by a deep clicking noise that echoed through the trees, like the ticking of an old clock. From between the trunks it appeared, a creature with legs like black pillars and a body covered in plates of dark chitin, its eyes small and red, its mouth a grinding circle of teeth that turned slowly as it moved. The ground sagged under its weight, its path straight and unyielding. The beast waited until it passed, its breath slow and silent, the child staring with wide eyes, barely daring to breathe, and only when the sound of its steps faded into the distance did they move again. The path narrowed, roots twisting high and close overhead. The child felt the air growing warmer again, scented now with the heavy smell of flowers too sweet to be safe. The beast's pace quickened, its eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The flowers appeared ahead, their petals black at the edges and deep red at the heart, each one larger than the child's head, their scent pulling at the mind like a soft hand. The child swayed, and the beast shifted them higher, pushing through the patch, without pausing until the flowers were gone and the air was clean again. At last the jungle thinned, the trees pulling back to reveal a wide stretch of ground where the moonlight poured down silver and clear. The river ahead shone like a strip of molten glass, its surface broken only by the slow drift of strange shapes beneath. The beast paused at the edge, its eyes on the far bank where the land rose sharply into a wall of black stone, a path curling upward along its side, the sound of the river deep and steady like the pulse of the world itself. The beast stepped into the water, the cold biting but the current steady, the child's arms around its neck, their eyes fixed on the far side where the shadows seemed to move. and as they reached the midpoint of the river, a sound rose from downstream, low and drawn out like the call of something ancient and awake. The beast's ears turned toward it, but its pace never slowed, the far bank drawing closer with every step, the stone wall looming above like the side of some great fortress. The cliffside path wound upward in a slow curve, the rock slick with mist and the narrow edge falling away into shadow. Far below, the river gleamed faintly, carrying pieces of the broken freighter downstream toward the endless jungle. The beast climbed with steady steps, each claw sinking into the stone for grip, the child holding tightly to the thick fur at its shoulder, the cold wind pressing against them and carrying the faraway cries of creatures that had never seen the light of the moons. Halfway up, the path widened into a ledge where a crooked tree clung to the rock, its roots twisted deep into the cracks. The beast stopped here, scanning the air with slow turns of its head. The sky above was clear for the moment, the stars bright and sharp, the constellations shifting faintly with the slow turn of the world. The child looked up too, their eyes catching the light of those distant fires. But before they could ask anything, the beast's ears twitched and its body lowered slightly. The sound came from above and behind, soft at first, then rising into the faint rustle of leaves and the scrape of something heavy on stone. From the dark at the top of the cliff, a shape dropped, its scales glinting in the starlight, its body lean but long, with talons that caught the rock and a head crowned with sharp spines. It landed in front of the ledge, blocking the path ahead, its throat pulsing with a low growl that rolled across the stone like the first warning of a storm. The beast stepped forward, placing the child behind it without a glance, its own growl answering, lower and longer, carrying a weight that made the air seem thicker. The spined predator tilted its head, its eyes narrowing as it measured the beast. Then it moved with sudden speed, a blur of claws and teeth that drove forward with enough force to crack the stone. The beast met it head-on, the impact shaking the ledge and sending small stones tumbling into the darkness below. Claws struck against chitin, teeth snapped against fur and bone. The two locked in a storm of strikes that rang out like the clash of metal, their bodies twisting dangerously close to the edge. The child crouched low behind the tree, watching with wide eyes as the fight raged, each moment sending sprays of stone chips into the air. The beast's arms swept wide, claws catching the spined predator across the side and tearing deep grooves. But the predator only hissed louder, its spines rattling before it lunged again, its teeth sinking into the beast's shoulder. The beast's roar echoed off the cliff, shaking loose dust from the rock above. Yet it did not fall back. Instead, it drove forward, using the weight of its body to slam the predator into the cliff wall with a sound like a tree splitting in a storm. The predator's grip loosened, the beast's claw striking again and again until the spines snapped and the growls turned to choking gasps. At last the predator collapsed, its body slumping against the rock. The beast stood over it for a long breath, steam rising from its wounds in the cool air. Then it stepped back, its chest heaving, its eyes still burning with the heat of the fight. The child moved from behind the tree, their small voice soft and uncertain, calling out a sound that might have been the start of a name. The beast turned its head slightly, meeting the child's gaze, and for a heartbeat the noise of the jungle seemed far away, the wind still and the stars above unmoving. Then the beast lowered itself, motioning for the child to climb onto its back. They moved on, the path narrowing again until at last it opened into a high ridge with the ground leveled and the view stretched out for miles. The jungle below, a shifting sea of shadow, the rivers like silver threads, and far on the horizon the faint glow of cities that did not belong to humans. Above them the stars were brighter now, their light unbroken by cloud or smoke. The beast paused here, its gaze fixed on a cluster of 3 stars that burned with a pale gold light. The child followed its gaze, but did not understand the meaning. Yet the beast seemed to draw something from them, a memory or a warning, its claws flexing against the stone, as if bracing for something it knew would come. The peace lasted only moments before a sound like tearing metal split the air, streaks of blue light cutting across the sky, small but fast, each one leaving a trail of fire. The beast's head snapped toward the source, its muscles tensing. The child clung tighter as the sound grew louder, and then from the far side of the ridge came the whine of engines, sharper and closer than before, followed by the flash of movement as dark shapes rose over the edge, their bodies sleek and their weapons already aimed. The hunters of the council had found them, their armor shining faintly in the starlight, their voices crackling through the air in a language the child did not know, their steps quick and precise as they fanned out across the ridge, their weapons glowing with the cold blue of charged plasma. The beast stepped back slowly, its body turning to shield the child completely, its eyes scanning the line of hunters for weakness. The hunters raised their weapons in unison, and for a moment all was silent but the wind. Then the first shot came, a thin lance of blue that cut through the air toward the beast's head. But the beast moved, faster than the child could follow, the shot passing harmlessly into the stone, and in the same movement it closed the distance to the nearest hunter, its claws tearing the weapon away and sending the armored figure sprawling. The ridge exploded into motion as the rest opened fire, blue light flashing across the dark, the air filling with a high-pitched scream of charged bolts, and the deep roars of the beast. The fight was brutal and close, the hunters moving with precision, but the beast with raw power and speed, each strike breaking their line, each roar shaking their focus. The child crouched low against the rock, eyes darting between the flashes of light and the dark mass of the beast as it moved through the chaos. The ridge lit and darkened in quick bursts until at last only the sound of the wind remained, the hunters fallen or retreating into the shadows from which they had come. The beast stood in the center of the ridge, its breath heavy, its body marked with fresh burns and cuts. The child rose slowly, their eyes wide, the silence of the jungle below now heavier than before, the stars watching from above without judgment. The beast turned toward the child, and in the faint light its eyes seemed to hold both the wild fire of the fight and something calmer beneath, a stillness that promised the battle was not the end but only the path to something greater. Far on the horizon a new light appeared, brighter than the stars and growing quickly. The beast's gaze fixed on it, its muscles tightening. The child followed its gaze and felt the faint vibration of engines in the rock beneath their feet. Whatever came next would not be the jungle's doing. It would be the will of the sky itself, and the night seemed to lean forward to see what the ridge would hold when it arrived. The new light grew larger with each passing breath, swelling in the sky until it cast silver and blue across the ridge. The stars seemed to fade against its glow. The beast stood still, its eyes locked on the approaching shape. The child clung to its shoulder, feeling the faint hum in the air that came with engines far beyond anything human hands could build. The ship broke through the upper clouds like a blade sliding from its sheath, its surface black and smooth except for the lines of faint gold that pulsed with slow rhythm. It moved without sound at first, gliding down until the wind caught its edges and sent a low moan across the ridge. The beast's ears flicked at the sound, the child's heart thudding harder with each moment. The ship slowed, tilting to reveal its underside where doors began to open like the petals of some dark flower. From within, smaller craft emerged, each one shaped like a crescent and moving with the grace of predators on the hunt. They spread wide, circling the ridge before settling into position, their weapons shifting in slow arcs, their lights sweeping over the rock until they found the beast and the small figure at its side. The air crackled faintly as the weapons came online. The child tightened their grip, their eyes darting from one hunter ship to the next. A voice rolled down from above, amplified until it filled the sky, speaking in the trade tongue so that every living thing might understand. The voice was cold and steady, announcing that the beast was an outlaw of the council, that the penalty for harboring it was death, that the human child was to be taken into protective custody for questioning. The words protective custody made the beast's claws dig into the stone, its body lowering slightly, its shoulders rising like the tide before a storm. The smaller craft began to descend, their lights growing sharper, their engines a high steady hum that vibrated in the bones. The beast stepped back toward the cliff edge, the child feeling the cold wind rushing up from the darkness below. There was nowhere to go but down into the endless jungle or forward into the teeth of the hunters. The choice lay heavy between them, yet the beast did not falter, its eyes tracking each movement of the descending craft, its ears catching the faint shifts in the hum that marked the arming of weapons. The first hunter landed, its legs folding with insect precision, the canopy sliding back to reveal the pilot within, a figure clad in dark armor, with a helmet that caught the light and sent it scattering. The figure stepped out with a long staff in hand, the weapon glowing faintly along its length. The pilot's movements were slow and deliberate, the kind of steps taken by one who knows their prey has nowhere to run. The beast turned to face them fully, the child tucked close against its chest, the wind pulling at their hair and clothes. The hunter spoke, their voice flat, offering the beast a single choice: surrender the child and receive a swift execution, or fight and watch the child taken anyway. The words hung in the cold air, the beast's gaze never leaving the hunter's mask, its breath slow and heavy, a deep rumble starting in its chest. The hunter's grip tightened on the staff, the hum of the weapon rising in pitch, and then the beast moved, the world seeming to tilt as it launched forward with a speed that broke the stillness like glass. The hunter's staff came up, catching the first strike, and sending a shower of sparks into the air. The beast's claws slashed again, the hunter twisting away, their movements fast and precise, but lacking the raw weight of the beast's charge. The fight drove them across the ridge, the other craft holding their positions, but tracking the movement with unblinking aim. The child crouched low behind a jet of stone, eyes darting between the blinding flashes of each strike. The hunter feinted left, then swept low, the staff catching the beast's leg and sending it staggering toward the edge. The child gasped, the hunter pressing the advantage. Each strike aimed to drive the beast back, but the beast's claws caught the staff, twisting it away in a motion that snapped the weapon's glow to darkness. The hunter tried to draw a blade from their hip, but the beast's other hand struck, the impact sending the armored figure skidding across the stone until they slammed into the ridge wall, their helmet cracking with a sharp sound. The beast turned its head toward the remaining craft, its breath coming in slow bursts, its wounds from the earlier battle still burning, but its stance unbroken. The craft shifted in response, weapons tilting, the child's eyes caught on the faint glow building at the tips of each barrel, the hum in the air climbing higher until it rattled the stones beneath their feet. The beast stepped forward, placing itself fully between the child and the firing line, its head lowering, its claws curling deep into the rock. The first shot came not from the craft but from above, a beam of searing light striking the ground between the beast and the hunters, the shockwave rolling them both back a step. From the clouds another figure descended, armor etched with lines of silver, moving with a fluid grace that seemed out of place on the harsh ridge, their landing silent, their visor reflecting both the beast and the child in its smooth surface. The hunters hesitated, their weapons shifting slightly, but not firing. The new arrival spoke in the council tongue, their voice calm, yet edged with command, ordering the hunters to hold fire. The craft stilled, their engines lowering to an idle hum. The beast's gaze narrowed, its stance shifting. The child looked between them, sensing something in the way the beast's breath slowed. The newcomer stepped forward, removing their helmet, revealing eyes the beast seemed to know, eyes that belonged to someone from a time before the wars, someone who had stood beside it, once on another world far from here. The newcomer said they owed the beast a debt, that the laws of the council were not enough to erase what had been done. They turned to the other hunters and spoke words that carried weight, warning them that killing the beast now would bring consequences far beyond this moon. The hunters shifted uneasily, their weapons lowering slightly, but their leader's voice crackled over the comms, cold and unyielding, ordering them to ignore the warning and finish the mission. The newcomer did not move aside, instead stepping closer to the beast and the child, their stance making it clear that they would stand with them. The craft above adjusted position, their lights sweeping across the ridge once more, the engines rising in pitch, the air thick with the scent of ozone. The beast shifted the child onto its back, freeing its claws, its eyes locking on the lead craft, the moment hanging in silence, the stars above watching without blinking. The ridge seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the slow wind and the hum of weapons ready to fire. The newcomer glanced at the beast and gave a slight nod, a signal understood without words, and in that instant the calm broke, the ridge exploding into motion once more. The ridge erupted into motion as the hunters opened fire, streams of blue energy slicing the air. The beast leapt sideways, with the child clinging to its back, the newcomer's silver-etched armor catching the light as they raised their own weapon. a blade that hummed with a faint white glow. Each movement they made cutting clean arcs through the incoming fire. The air burned with the sharp scent of ozone and scorched stone. The beast moved low and fast, weaving between jagged rocks, its claws gouging deep lines as it turned sharply toward the nearest craft. The child clinging tighter, their eyes wide as the ground seemed to shake with every step. The newcomer stayed close, their blade flashing again and again, deflecting shots that would have struck the beast or the child, their movements steady despite the chaos. Their gaze locked on the hunters, with a calm that spoke of long years in battle. The lead hunters shouted an order, their voice crackling over the comms, two of the craft breaking from their formation to flank the ridge from opposite sides, their weapons glowing hotter. The beast caught the shift in position and knew they meant to trap them. It growled low, the sound rumbling through the stone underfoot. The newcomer glanced at the beast, then at the child, and in that brief look there was a wordless understanding, a choice that would change what happened next. The newcomer spoke quickly in the council tongue, their voice sharp and certain, telling the hunters to stand down, reminding them of the law of debt, the ancient code older than the council itself, the law that bound a life saved to a life owed. The lead hunter laughed through the comms, dismissing the old traditions as stories for weaker times. But the newcomer stepped forward, lowering their blade slightly, yet making no move to retreat, their voice carrying the weight of memory as they told the story. They spoke of a battle on a frozen world long ago, where a young soldier of the council had been trapped under the wreckage of a burning crawler, their comrades gone, their weapon broken, death closing in as enemy fire cut through the snow. And from the white haze a shadow had come, not a friend, but a predator feared by every race that walked under the stars, a beast whose name was spoken in warning. Yet instead of killing, it had lifted the wreckage with claws and fangs and carried the wounded soldier to safety, leaving them in the hands of medics before vanishing into the blizzard without a word. That soldier was the newcomer, and the beast standing here was the same that had saved them. The debt between them bound by the old code that could not be broken without shaming the bloodline of the one who broke it. The newcomer's voice was steady, but edged with something hard, as they told the hunters that to kill the beast now would be to spit on that code, to erase the honor that held the stars together when the council was still young. The hunters hesitated, their weapons shifting slightly, the lead hunter's voice sharp again, telling them to ignore the debt, that the council's orders were the only law. But the silence among the ranks told another story. The old code was not forgotten even if the council wished it so. The beast stood still, its eyes fixed on the newcomer, the child's small hands gripping the fur at its shoulders, as if sensing that this moment mattered more than any fight. The lead hunter raised their weapon again, the hum of its charge filling the air. The newcomer stepped in front of the beast and the child, their blade lifting once more, their stance making it clear they would not move. The wind on the ridge carried the sound of distant engines, a deeper thrum than the craft above, something heavier approaching from beyond the horizon. The hunters shifted uneasily, the lead craft adjusting position as if preparing for whatever was coming. The beast's ears turned toward the sound, its claws flexing, its gaze sweeping the distant sky. The newcomer glanced back and caught the same glint of light far off, the kind that meant a flagship was entering the moon's atmosphere. The child pressed closer against the beast's neck, the low vibration in the air making their bones feel heavy. The hunters above paused in their fire, their comms alive with new orders, their voices tighter now, edged with something close to uncertainty. The newcomer spoke low to the beast, their tone not one of command but of warning, telling it that the flagship meant the council itself was here, that the orders would not just be to kill but to make an example, that no law old or new would matter in the face of such a decision. The beast's growl was deep and steady, its eyes narrowing, its body lowering slightly in preparation. The child could feel the tension through the thick fur beneath their fingers. The lead hunter's voice broke through the comms, ordering the others to hold position until the flagship arrived. The craft above shifted into a tighter circle, their lights sweeping the ridge like cold eyes. The newcomers stepped back beside the beast, their blade lowering but still ready, their breath steady despite the growing hum in the air. The beast adjusted its stance, so the child was shielded from every angle, its gaze fixed on the sky where the glow of the incoming ship was growing. brighter by the second. When the flagship broke through the clouds, it was like a piece of the night itself had torn away. Its hull vast and black with lines of crimson light running like rivers across its surface. The sound of its engines was low and endless, a sound that seemed to press against the chest and slow the breath. It hung above the ridge for a moment, blocking the stars, before descending slowly, the air bending under its weight, the wind rushing outward in all directions. From its underside a single platform lowered, carrying figures clad in armor heavier than the hunters, their crests marked with the sigils of the highest rank. At their center stood a tall figure in robes that shifted like liquid shadow, the head crowned with a band of gold that caught the faintest glimmers of light, their eyes sharp and cold as they looked down at the scene on the ridge, their voice carrying easily over the sound of the engines. They spoke the sentence in the trade tongue, calling the beast guilty of defiance, guilty of sheltering the child, guilty of breaking the natural order that the council claimed to uphold. They ordered the child taken and the beast executed on sight, their tone making it clear that no protest would be heard. The newcomer stepped forward, speaking of the debt once more, their words sharper, their stance unyielding, but the robed figure dismissed it with a wave, calling it the superstition of a weaker age. The beast's breath came slow, the child's grip tightening, the newcomer's blade lifting again, the hunters shifting at the edges of the ridge, the air thick with the weight of what was about to happen. Far below in the jungle the night creatures fell silent, as if sensing the moment. The flagship's engines deepened their pitch, the glow of its weapons beginning to rise, and in the beast's eyes the fire of every fight it had ever survived began to burn brighter. Whatever happened next would not just decide their lives, it would decide what the stars themselves remembered about this night, and the law that might be broken forever. The air over the ridge felt heavy, as if the sky itself had leaned closer to see what choice would be made. The beast stood with its back to the child, its claws deep in the stone, the newcomer holding their blade steady at its side. The robed figure on the flagship platform raised a hand, their voice carrying like cold wind, calling for the hunters to advance and take the child now. The order left no space for argument. The hunters began to move in a slow, tightening arc, their weapons glowing. Hotter with each step, the hum of the flagship's engines deepening until it filled the bones. The beast's gaze swept across the circle, its eyes catching every shift of armor and every breath drawn before the strike. The child pressed closer to its back, their small hands gripping the thick fur as if trying to anchor themselves to something unshakable. The newcomer glanced at the beast and gave a small nod, a silent signal that the moment had come when choice turned into action. The beast lowered its head, and the deep rumble in its chest rose into a sound that rolled across the ridge, like distant thunder before a storm. The hunters hesitated for the briefest breath, that sound older than their orders reaching into the part of them that still remembered fear. But the robed figure's voice cut through, sharp and cold, commanding them forward. The first shot came, a narrow lance of blue light streaking toward the beast's head. The newcomer stepped into its path, their blade catching the beam and scattering it in a flare of white sparks. The beast moved then, not away, but forward, charging toward the nearest hunter, with a speed that split the air around it. Claws struck armor, sending the hunter sprawling across the stone. Another stepped in to block, but the newcomer's blade flashed, cutting the barrel from their weapon in a single motion. The ridge became a storm of motion and light, the hunters pressing in from all sides, the beast tearing through their line with the weight of a storm breaking through trees. Each strike pushing them back, each roar shaking their aim. The child crouched low against the rock, the fight raging in arcs of blue and white around them. The robed figure raised their hand again, and the flagship's weapons shifted, massive barrels tilting downward, their glow growing brighter, the air thickening with the heat of gathering energy. The hunters began to fall back, clearing the ridge as the platform rose slightly, the voice of the robed figure ringing out that the law was older than mercy, that prey could never stand beside predator without tearing the balance of the stars apart. The child heard the words, but did not understand, their eyes fixed on the beast that still stood between them and every threat. The newcomer turned toward the flagship and shouted in the council tongue, their voice loud enough to carry even over the engines, declaring that the law they claimed to uphold was not balance but fear, that it was born in an age when the strong crushed the weak without consequence. that tonight on this ridge a choice was being made not just for one moon, but for every world that still looked to the stars for justice. Their words cut through the air like a blade, the hunters shifting uneasily as if some part of them knew the truth in it. The robed figure laughed, a sound without warmth, and gave the final order to fire. The glow at the barrels reached its peak, the heat pressing down like the breath of a sun. The child buried their face in the beast's fur. The newcomer braced to leap, and then the beast moved in a way none expected, stepping forward out of the shadow of the rock, standing tall with its chest bare to the sky, claws lowered, head high, making no move to hide. It looked up at the flagship and let out a single long roar that shook the air and seemed to travel beyond the clouds themselves. For the first time the hunters froze, their weapons lowering by instinct. The sound carried something that was not threat but defiance, not hunger but promise. It was a roar that spoke to every world where prey had lived in fear, and every place where the strong believed themselves untouchable. The child lifted their head, their eyes wide as they saw the lights of the flagship falter for the briefest moment, the robed figure's hand lowering a fraction before tightening again in command. But before the order could be given, a single shot rang out from the ridge, not from the hunters and not from the flagship. It came from the newcomer's weapon, aimed not at the beast nor the child, but at the robed figure themselves. The shot struck the golden band on their head, shattering it into fragments that fell like sparks into the wind. The platform lurched as voices rose in confusion, the flagship's guns holding their fire as the crew scrambled to protect their leader. The hunters on the ridge hesitating fully now, their eyes darting between the beast and the newcomer. The beast took the moment, stepping back to lift the child into its arms, turning so that the rising wind caught their hair and the starlight lit them both. The newcomer stepped beside them, their blades still ready, but now the ridge was quiet except for the engines far above. The robed figure's voice no longer certain, their words sharp but without the same weight. The hunters did not advance, some lowering their weapons completely, the glow in the barrels above fading as the command to fire never came. One by one the hunters stepped back, their armor catching the silver of the moons. The newcomer spoke again, telling them that the law they had followed this night was broken not by force, but by choice, that they had seen predator shield prey, and in doing so prove that the balance the council spoke of was nothing but a cage. The words hung over the ridge like the first light of a new dawn, the hunters saying nothing, but making no move to stop the beast as it turned toward the path that wound back into the jungle. The child looked over the beast's shoulder as they moved away, seeing the hunters part to let them pass, their eyes following but their weapons staying silent, the newcomer walking at their side until they reached the edge of the ridge. There they stopped, looking at the beast with a long, steady gaze. No thanks spoken, no farewell, only a nod that carried the weight of the debt now repaid, and something more, something that could not be put into words. The beast stepped into the shadow of the trees, the sounds of the jungle rising again as if the night had been holding its breath, the child resting their head against its chest, feeling the steady beat of its heart. The path ahead was dark, but it felt different now. Not like a place of endless danger, but like a space where choice could still shape what came next. Above them the stars shone brighter than before, the same constellations but carrying a new meaning, a reminder of what had been done here. On the ridge behind them the flagship began to rise, its engines lifting it back toward the clouds, the hunters following, their formation breaking in small ways that hinted at doubt, the robed figure retreating into the safety of their ship, their law still written in the records, but changed in the minds of those who had stood here and seen the truth. The jungle swallowed the ridge from view, the sound of the engines fading until only the call of night creatures remained.